I'm very happy to be here and share my experience about oral hermeneutics and my journey also. And I just saw this book, The Return of Oral Hermeneutics, written by Tom Steffen and Bill Raker. And when I look at the author, for example, okay, let me, all right, okay. It's not working.
Hmm.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it was.
Okay. This one, Tom was like a missionary to Ifugao, where I came from. I'm from Ifugao province. It's like a more or high orality reliant culture. And I also see the observation of Tom that people there in my province, he observed a move swiftly from a predominantly oral society to a functionally literate one. So in a short time, the the province changed to be one of the like highly educated province in comparison with many provinces in the Philippines. And I come from that province, and I'd like to share some of my experience and journey as I share this topic. And they define the oral hermeneutics as an experiential interpretation method to understand more fully the narrative genre of the scripture. It accomplishes this by focusing on the conversations, actions, and interactions or characters found in a biblical text. So that's how they define oral hermeneutics. And you see, I underline characterologically. So they invented such a word. But at the end of the paragraph, multiple oral versions are presently in use globally. They also acknowledge that yes, oral hermeneutics is like diverse. And in my like research, I did oral hermeneutics, which focuses on how the texts were originally heard and understood by audiences in predominantly oral societies, often considering factors such as memory, performance, and communal engagement. So that's what I applied, basically how the Gospel of Mark has been received or heard in the ancient orally. I'll be sharing more on this, but this is very important in theological education. When I studied in Bible college and seminary, I did not hear such a word, oral hermeneutics. But I experienced participating in dramatizing the Old Testament or New Testament sceneries of the Bible, and these are some examples of presenting in an oral performance the biblical text. I also visited a place in Thailand among the Lao people in Thailand, and when I attended their church, the preaching was not expository as I learned in the seminary. It's very simple, just sharing short story and then this sing, and then that's all very simple. And I think theological schools need to reflect on this backgrounds of students, especially in our time. We are in a global village. We have this old book, Understanding Media by McLuhan, but it is a prophetic of what is happening now about our digital age and orality or even oral hermeneutics in theological schools. We need to talk about and include in our curriculum. So as I said, in my experience, in my research, I learned more of the scripture when I applied oral hermeneutics. Let me continue on by mentioning oral stories before the writing of the Gospels. The oral tradition before the writing of the Gospels, and we have famous names like Hermann Gunkel, Rudolf Bultmann. They recognized oral tradition in those days. But all right, and there's like a form criticism became very popular in theological schools. And we know what is form criticism, which is a branch of New Testament research, which is concerned with the isolation, analysis, interpretation of that oral tradition, like looking at the forms of the Gospels, for example, like the sayings, the form of sayings, or parables, or proclamation, or whatever. But then Werner Kalber made a critique. In New Testament studies, the problem manifests itself in the inability of form criticism to produce oral hermeneutic, right? So it was recognized by Werner Culver, the inability of this form criticism to produce oral hermeneutic. Later on, Walter Ong popularized such orality in his book Orality and Literacy, the technologizing of the word. And he made a very great contrast between orality and literacy. And he called it the Great Divide. But actually, he also learned from the earlier writers. And the Great Divide, there's the oral culture and print culture, very different, very opposite. And such thinking influence scholars like Werner Kulber, and he wrote the book, The Oral and the Written Gospel. And we can see the how Ong was very influential to him. But then, let me read what Walter Ong said, narrative is even more prevalent in what Walter Ong classifies as primary oral culture, where knowledge cannot be managed in elaborate, more or less scientifically abstract categories, but by the use of stories to store, organize, and communicate much of what they know. I think there's a validity of the more oral culture, or like a high orality reliant culture. They are more concrete in their thinking, in their presentation, than those like low orality reliant culture, wherein they're more abstract. But as we move forward, there is what we call orality literacy continuum, development against Ong's Great Divide. We do not affirm the earlier idea of Milman Parry and Albert Lord, who influenced Walter Ong, that oral and literate were taken as a fundamental dichotomy inherent in human culture. People, verbal art, even whole societies were confidently labeled with one or the other term, and crucially, never with both, right? So we can see the critique against such a great divide, because we can see both. We are oral people, and we say literacy is an extension of ourselves. And Susan Nidit's oral literate continuum may explain the two media dimensions in the biblical text, stressing that the written texts were influenced by orality. Okay, and then let me move to this oral hermeneutic, from narrative criticism to an oral narrative approach. I study narrative criticism, and so I know the emphasis on the whole story, for example. And this is like a development. The form criticism tried to like dismantle or separate the different forms, but here unifying the story. Like there's a one author unifying it, and the development is oral narrative approach. So we have books like Mark a Story by David Rhodes and Donald Mitchie, and especially Hearing the Whole Story. Okay, and I wrote my dissertation on this paradigm. The question is this: how the audience would have heard rather than read silently. It's because about very few people in the ancient could read, 2 or 3% or 5 or 8 in the Roman world. And 95% of Christians in the 21st century received the message by means of oral performance, right? Because the manuscripts were written not to be read silently, but generally to be like performed orally in public. Now, I'm revising my dissertation and I'd like to publish and make this title like Hearing the Characters of Jesus and His Disciples, an oral hermeneutic to Mark's narrative. And the main question is this: how might Mark's target audience have heard and understood his characterizations of Jesus and his disciples in an ancient oral narration in view of dramatizing an ideological clash intended to persuade them to follow Jesus and join his community? Now, let me move to social memory, which I also use in my dissertation. Social memory, or sometimes called collective memory, by this French sociologist Maurice Hobwarts, as clarified by Eric Eve, it is not to denote objective knowledge of what exactly happened in the past. It is instead used to mean beliefs about the past, ways of talking about and interpreting the past, and ways of using the past in the interest of the present, and in particular, a group's identity and self-understanding of creating a world of shared meanings. Let me try to illustrate later on, but let me read this one. In the case of Mark's audience, the themes and events in their popular Israelite tradition, also found in the Old Testament, would have resonated through association in their hearing of Mark's narrative, particularly Mark's characterization of Jesus and his disciples. So when they hear, for example, the book of Mark being performed, being read aloud, they also associate with other knowledge they have in their collective memory or social memory. Let me illustrate, for example. In chapter 5 of Mark, we have this story, Jairus' daughter and the bleeding woman. Now, Mark is known for his sandwich method, wherein two stories he put together. He cut one story and insert another. So in this story, the Jairus' daughter story, he cut and put at the middle the story of the bleeding woman. Meaning there's a close connection between these two stories. And when it was being performed or read orally, publicly, the story of Jairus' daughter, as the story moved forward, and then the story of the bleeding woman suffering for 12 years. And then he was healed by Jesus Christ. Towards the end of the story, Jairus' daughter was raised to life, and she was 12 years old. If you see the number 12, if you can listen to the number 12 there, the bleeding woman suffering for 12 years, Jairus' daughter, who is 12 years old, the audience would have heard in their like associate in their collective or social memory about the 12 tribes of Israel. Meaning, these two stories, they are symbols of Israel, sick and dying, and their only hope is Jesus. All right, so that is an illustration. Another words from Werner Kulber. We treat words primarily as records in need of interpretation, neglecting too often a rather different hermeneutic deeply rooted in biblical language that proclaims words as an act inviting participation. Now, you see, the rhetorical effect when the gospel, for example, of Mark is being read aloud, there's this rhetorical effect. And I'd like to illustrate with the ending of Mark. The ending of Mark is very controversial, but I think it ended in chapter 16, verse 8, intentionally. It's like an open-ended, it's an open-ended story. It did not really end that way. It was like inviting the audience. You know, the ending there is like this, and they were afraid. The women were afraid. They did not say to anyone anything because they were afraid. Now, the challenge is will the audience be afraid also? Will they be afraid? So the Gospel of Mark promised a good news in chapter 1, verse 1, and then ending like this. You know, they were afraid. So for those audience listening, they were invited to participate in this story. Oral hermeneutics is like inviting the audience to participate in the story. They are part of the story. So when it was being performed, they were being invited, you know, to continue the story. And this is my last point: oral performance and digital orality. Now, David Rhodes coined the term performance criticism. And in his paper, he argues for the centrality of performance in the life of the early church, a point that traditional scholarship has not addressed. He looked at the ancient, like what I did in my paper, but then he also wrote at the end, you know, finally, performance would breathe new life into biblical studies and into the experience of the Bible in the modern world. So David Rhodes is interested of the effect of this oral hermeneutics even to the present, if it is being performed now, and then what is the effect to the audience now. For example, let me again go back to Mark chapter 13, verse 14. Jesus Christ said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, Robert Fowler used this as the title of his book, Let the Reader Understand, and explained what he calls this reader response criticism. You see, this is a very reader oriented, the contemporary reader trying to engage with the text. But actually, this is a misunderstanding of let the reader understand. Because as I said, very few could really read silently. There were few good oral performers who can read publicly, and they are the readers. So this editorial is trying to point to the oral performer. Let this oral performer understand, right? So the public reader rather than the silent reader. We have some examples, for example, in the Bible. Let me read Colossians 4:16 when Paul said, after this letter has been read to you, see that it is also read in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you in turn read the letter from Laodicea. All right, so you see, Paul's letter was being read publicly by a public reader. So it was not meant to be read silently because very few could really read in those days. David Rhodes, this is David Rhodes when he was younger, trying to present a dramatic presentation of the Gospel of Mark. You can see that in YouTube. Even now he is old, but still he is trying to present, read. When he is teaching New Testament, he is trying to actualize this oral performance. So in some theological schools, this is being emphasized, but maybe not much with others. This is David Wenham when I was given the privilege to be a visiting fellow in Trinity College, and I attended this class. And what he did is to divide this class, and one group is like Paul, and another group are the Judaizers, and as if they were like debating. So a kind of oral, listening rather than just reading privately. Now, in Thailand, there's like a conference, seminar on sights, sounds, stories. You see, this orality and even oral hermeneutics being recognized now in theological schools. And so I like to go back and especially to this what we call digital orality. Now we can capture our students at PTS, for example, even the high schools, they use this their camera, their video for their assignments, and even their college and seminary. So we are using this digital technology, and it has to be like incorporated in our like methodologies in theological schools. So let me go back to this The Return of Oral Hermeneutics by Tom Stephan and William. And I see their emphasis on, yes, we need the textual hermeneutics, the traditional way, but oral hermeneutics can also help. So I'm teaching hermeneutics in my school, and I also present such like a concept, oral hermeneutics, in addition with other methods. I remember what Larry Caldwell wrote years back. He called it ethnohermeneutics. It's a critique of the dominance of the Western way. And so he was like proposing that can another culture develop their own methodology, their hermeneutics, applicable for their own context. And I'm thinking that oral hermeneutics, in as much as it is applicable globally, but more so with those who are like with high orality reliant culture, more appropriate. And we respect also the emphasis on textual hermeneutics in other like low uh, reliant oral reliant culture. They don't let's say the print culture people, maybe they like more this textual hermeneutics, but I can see the importance of both. And this should also be included in theological schools. All right, so thank you for listening. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.